Hello, and thanks for joining us on our final day of the Greenlight Guru True Quality Summit. I hope you've had a chance to enjoy the last few days of learning actionable tips, trends, and best practices to achieve true quality for your medical devices and business. This session is on how to get your COVID-19 related medical device to market under FDA's Emergency Use Authorization, EUA. I'm Jessica Lyons, Senior Medical Device Guru here at Greenlight Guru, and I will be moderating for this special session. I know our speaker, Kyle Rose, is really looking forward to sharing his experience working with manufacturers and distributors around the world to get COVID-19 related medical devices to market under FDA's EUA. Before we dive too deep into today's session and introduce our speaker and his company, Rook Qualtiy Systems, I'm going to touch on a few items really quickly. First, this is going to run for about 45 minutes in total and will include a Q&A session at the end where Kyle is going to answer all of your questions, or as many as we can get to in that time. So I encourage you to submit your questions throughout the presentation as they come up in the box on the right-hand side. Anything that we are unable to answer, Kyle will be able to follow up with you guys after the session, and this entire session will be recorded. Once this session wraps up, there is about a 10-minute break before the next live session begins. If you're interested in learning about why remote research is or isn't right for your project, make sure you're registered for the next session and use your unique link to tune in. If you aren't already signed up, you can still register at virtual-summit.greenlight.guru. Now, before we jump in, I'd like to share a few words about Greenlight Guru and why we put on this free virtual summit. If you've been on one of our training sessions before, then you know we put these on because improving the quality of life is our mission here at Greenlight Guru, likely a similar mission as many of you at today's summit. Anything we can do as an organization that helps device makers bring safer, life-changing devices to market quicker and with less risk aligns with that mission. We are constantly looking for ways to fulfill that mission, whether it's through hosting free events and training sessions, through partnering with world-class medical device consultants, or through our award-winning medical device QMS software. If you'd like to learn more about why medical device companies from across the globe are moving away from paper-based, general-purpose quality management systems and adopting our purpose-built medical device quality management software, I encourage you to head on over to www.greenlight.guru after today's presentation to schedule your free personalized one-on-one demo. Now, on to the bulk of today's presentation. Let me give a proper introduction to today's presenter. Kyle Rose is a medical device expert and president of Rook Qualtiy Systems, a consulting firm providing specialized and custom consulting services for all classes of medical devices, including software as a medical device. Kyle works as a quality system advisor for multiple medical device companies, overseeing overall quality strategy and ensuring compliance through documentation and auditing services. Kyle encourages the simplification of quality systems to reduce the quality burden and improve compliance through training and efficient QS design. Kyle is an expert in quality system development, ISO 13485 2016, 21 CFR 820, MDSAP, ISO 14971, CE mark design controls, risk management, CAPA, medical device software validation, and product development. So, without further ado, let me hand it over to Kyle.
Thanks, Jessica, and thanks for the introduction. Very excited to be presenting today, and we love working with Greenlight on these webinars and obviously the virtual summit. Quick overview, Jessica covered a lot of this, but Rook Qualtiy Systems is a consulting firm based in Atlanta, Georgia. We have consultants across the country as well as an international team based in Taiwan. We work with a lot of startup medical device companies to generate the initial quality system, help create the design history file, the risk management file. That includes a lot of SAMD or software device companies. And we support post-market as well, small, medium to very large companies on their GHF gap analysis, QMS transition to new standards such as MedSAP, MDR, quality system training, all of these types of things. Jessica did a great introduction on me, so not much else to cover here. I think we can go ahead and get into kind of the presentation highlights. So the topic today is the FDA Emergency Use Authorization, or EUA, and kind of how you can get this going for your company. So we want to go over what the EUA means, why you might consider the EUA, how communication with the FDA works for your EUA process, and how that might differ from your traditional 510K or Class 1 registration, as well as what quality system compliance regulations there are for the EUA. It's a little different than normal. We're going to dive into some high needed devices that are being worked on for EUA. So diagnostics, respirators, things like that are in high demand. We're going to talk a little bit about the IFU and labeling. That is one of the critical aspects the FDA has identified. And then also distribution. So we've seen a ton of companies, a ton of contacts that are not related to medical device reach out and want to know how they can help get masks or gloves or things on the market. And so we've helped a lot of these companies who want to pass along some of that information. Currently, Rook is working with diagnostic manufacturers, test kit assemblers and manufacturers, respirator N95 manufacturers, ventilator manufacturers, remote monitoring software, digital therapeutic softwares, and additional devices that are all taking advantage of this EUA process. We definitely want to share some of this insight we've learned working with all these different companies. So the high overview on the requirements for the EUA is that it isn't as rigorous as your traditional 510K. So many of the processes that are required for a traditional 510K are no longer needed to get your EUA on the market. FDA has used guidances. They are constantly publishing new guidances. I made a comment earlier that, this topic is a little tough because it's changing every day. Just late last week, they updated the guidance on respirators and N95 masks. Every day, the FDA is sending out a new list of either updated guidances or new EUAs they have granted. So definitely a lot going on and a lot changing. So you want to make sure you are checking on the FDA's website, reaching out to Rook if you have any questions. But the guidances have been very helpful with outlining what exactly is needed for each type of device. So this could be thermometers, this could be ventilators, this could be respirators, digital therapeutics, all of those types of things. The FDA has outlined in these specific guidances what is needed and how you submit this process. They have also identified, not only for the manufacturers applying for EUAs, but for distributors, what level of quality system compliance is required, as well as what testing is required. So say for the N95s or the KN95s, the FDA has outlined exactly what is needed before you can put a new respirator on the market or distribute one of these. And they also have special labeling requirements for the EUA as well, that you will have to comply with to get your FDA EUA approval. So to do this, you actually have to submit, similar to other submissions, you have to submit your EUA to the FDA. And the ones we have worked on and are currently working on, the FDA has been very great at communication. Each guidance that they provide for each type of device or diagnostic or software will have emails and people to reach out to in the actual guidance. So that's kind of the first start. If you have questions, you can reach out to those emails directly. They also have a pre-EUA submission process that's similar in design to the FDA pre-submission process, which is kind of a medium to interact with the FDA, ask specific questions prior to actually sending over your EUA submission. So you can use either the general Q&A email or this more formal EUA pre-submission process to discuss your device, discuss if an EUA is possible, and then actually go through that process. You actually submit your EUA to the FDA, and then you'll get an approval letter from them. It's very clear that in all the FDA's communication that EUA approval does not mean the device is cleared or approved under normal circumstances. It is only allowed for the EUA. So it's very clear that all your labeling at IFU must also communicate this as well. We're also saying that in certain situations, the FDA is requesting that additional post-EUA testing or information or trials or studies might need to be submitted, and typically they will outline those timelines for you. And if you look through some of the granted EUA approvals from the FDA, you'll see some of these timelines and stipulations that both parties have agreed to. So, one of the questions we get for a lot of companies looking at the process and trying to evaluate how they can help is, why do you submit an EUA? So obviously, we're under a current pandemic with the COVID-19 situation. So there's definitely a greater supply or greater demand for certain types of devices, certain types of PPE, as well as new diagnostics or test kits just to address this current pandemic. So that's kind of one of the big main reasons that a lot of the companies are doing it, is they want to support this pandemic and do anything they can for with their device and their experience. Another advantage, if you have a device and you weren't originally planning on doing EUA, or you might have added a feature, later in your roadmap, if you can apply that to the COVID pandemic or the EUA process, there's a great opportunity for you to gather real world evidence on your device and software. So, it might, you might have had to have a formal trial or have a 510K before you can get this information. Now, there is an opportunity for a lot of different devices and software to get on the market, maybe temporarily. We don't know exactly how long this EUA is going to last, but you're able to get a lot of real world evidence that in certain situations would take a lot longer and cost a lot more money through the EUA process. And then you can use that for future iterations of your device, future design or risk mitigation, things like that. Additionally, companies have asked quite a bit is how this can eventually support a 510K and when the EUA will end. I don't think anybody knows at this time when the EUA will end. The Zika EUA is still ongoing, that started in 2016. So there is some thought this might go on for a while, but there is, like I said, the opportunity to use some of this real world evidence, use this testing that you might have completed for the EUA in a 510K submission. And we have some companies that have done that already and already gotten clearance. They started using their device under EUA in March and now have a cleared 510K. Additionally, there might be new indications or uses for your device that you had not originally thought of that are now applicable or an option due to the EUA. So we definitely think if you have any advantages of using your device or any indications that might support, less people in a surgical room or more remote monitoring or things like that, that might not have initially been part of your plan, you can now take advantage of this EUA and use that process to get your device on the market faster. One of the big things that's changed, with the EUA versus a traditional 510K is there's not as much required for your submission, but you still have to maintain your quality system. And so we've kind of highlighted the bare minimum. If you are starting from scratch, you're new to the med device and you don't have a quality system, these are the main documents that we have identified with our work with other companies and EUA products that are required for documenting everything you'll need for your EUA. So document control and training, just a high level process to create documents, route and approve documents, make sure they're effective, and then also provide training on these procedures or work instructions. Obviously, we work very closely with Greenlight, so Greenlight is kind of the best way to do all of these things for early companies or new companies that are trying to get their device released under the EUA process. Design control and risk are also critical, regardless of software, a test kit, a face mask. Design control and risk are also critical to make sure you have specifications for your device, you have a defined testing plan, and you have outlined the risks related to the device. Supplier assessment is another key part of this, making sure that the materials you are sourcing for your device are compliant with the regulations and that you have a robust supply chain. This has been one of the biggest hurdles with the companies we've worked in is everybody's trying to get the same swabs or vials or things like that, specific reagents. So really making sure that you have a supplier assessment process and you are getting high quality. For companies new to med device regulations and taking advantage of EUA, the FDA looks at you as the regulatory holder, the one that gets the EUA granted. So you are the one responsible for having control of your suppliers. The next few are related more to once you have the EUA approval. So maintaining traceability of the device, who uses it, where it goes, if there's a distributor, all of that is required and defined in the EUA, as well as complaint handling, customer feedback, adverse event handling. So in the event that somebody is using your device or your product, there's a complaint or potentially a serious injury or death, you have to have a process that is clearly defined to receive this information and then potentially in the event of an adverse event or a complaint, communicate that to the FDA. Complaint handling also has investigation processes as well. For these quality system aspects, SOPs should be established, so these should be documented and approved. Work instructions for, if you're doing new assembly, inspection, testing, manufacturing as part of this new EUA process, you should have work instructions. They should be defined. People should train on those. We're working with a lot of design firms that have started making face shields or gowns or things like that. And we've helped them create work instructions and make sure these processes are established. Even though it's EUA, we still want to make sure that we're doing as much as we can to get high quality PPE and things like that out to the people using it in the hospitals. In certain situations, if you're doing higher volume manufacturing, such as diagnostic kits, things like that, reagents, or supplies, swabs, vials, certain validations might be required as well. And then also if there is a need for a clinical trial for a lot of the diagnostics or the test kits, you might have to have a clinical plan or a usability plan. And it's also good to have that formally documented within your quality system. IFU and labeling. So as we said, FDA will look at this in detail and they will have to review and approve your labeling instructions for use for your EUA. The big thing is identifying that this device, diagnostic test, software has not been FDA cleared or approved. It's only authorized under the EUA. So if you look back, a lot of these IFUs and labels are available. So with each company the FDA grants EUA, they also identify that EUA letter as well as IFU and label. With diagnostics, they're sending or they're adding the IFU for both the user and the laboratory. So you can look back at these. These are great resources to identify what needs to go in your IFU and label and give you a heads up on hopefully delay or speeding up the process with the FDA review so there's no delays. You might also have to identify the specific details if it is a specific diagnostic or test on how it can be used related to the EUA. So the FDA will review that and cover that with you during your FDA authorization. So now we're going to kind of touch on specific products and what the FDA has provided for these. on their website. So between guidances and templates, the FDA has provided a lot of information for these high need, high demand products. So the first one would be COVID-19 Diagnostics. There's a lot of companies. Most of the companies we're seeing, we're helping with a few, but most of them are established diagnostic companies that have then added COVID-related tests to their platform. So typically they have a quality system in place, but if it is more of like an academic institution, something like that, then you will have to do a lot of these quality systems and build that as well. So they've split it into three main categories as far as molecular, antibody, and antigen, as well as provided templates for both manufacturers and laboratories that kind of identify each section, what information is required. They'll highlight in yellow what you need to add for each specific section on these templates. So definitely, if you are this type of diagnostic, academic, or laboratory that wants to get a new test on the market, go and review these FDA templates and use that as the backbone for creating your EUA application. They also have identified like the CLIA requirements. So if it is required to have a CLIA lab to do your test, if it's waived and determined based on the CLIA regulations, the complexity of each test. So that's also information on their website that's easy to identify for your EUA. Additionally, they have identified in this template, a description of the test, the technology that's used, what CLIA regulations are required, specific antibodies or antigens that are detected, how the whole process works for your diagnostic, a description of the test steps, either for sample collection or for the laboratory testing as well, what reagents, how long it has to incubate or whatever it might be. If any control materials are required and which ones are required, how you would interpret the results, if any specific analyzers are used for this, these types of things, and as well as an overview of manufacturing and distribution. And then lastly, they'll list, have you list the components and reagents, the capability as far as time and throughput of this, stability of the reagents. There might have to be some testing that's required, either stability testing, shelf life, shipping testing, all of that might be required. And some of this might be able to be done post EUA authorization and some of that ongoing timeline. Analytical sensitivity and specificity is critical, obviously, for these tests. And then depending on what type, the molecular, antigen, antibody, there's a list of cross-reactivity that you need to complete as well. So this will be included as an example here below, but this will be included with each specific template on what cross-reactivity testing you will need to complete. So that's the diagnostic. Like I said, most of these companies already have a quality system, but some of the academic labs, things like that, they're creating them. It's a good resource. Rook can provide support for that as well. We've also seen a big uptick in the home collection, home testing kits. We've worked with a few of these and are working with a few of these as well. So with these, they have their own specific needs as far as what the FDA wants to see to authorize the EUA. Again, you'll have to list the components or reagents with included in your collection or test kit. So that could be like their saline, the vial, the swab, if it's just a saliva sample, how you collect that. Identify what testing laboratories can test it, what type of test, if it's the RT-PCR, whatever type of test you're doing, identifying that, and then testing out that process. So taking some samples, typically in a usability study, and sending them to a test lab to get results on your first kind of clinical trial usability study. Additionally, the IFU and labeling will be required. Again, all the same things that we covered earlier, stating that it is not FDA cleared or approved only for EUA. It'll go in a detailed review with the FDA on your IFE and labeling to make sure it is as easy to use as possible. With the idea of this being you're sending it to as many people as you can for them to do at their home. You got to make sure it's easy to interpret with images and wording that is easy to read for people to complete this without getting a false negative or a false positive. And then the usability study. So FDA has requested usability studies for the majority of these home collection testing kits. So that's broken down into your usability protocol, your use risk analysis. So identifying the risks related to the user's perspective and how that relates to the hazard situations and harms. And then your usability report once you've completed this testing. And then additionally, they will request a distribution plan. So they want to see how you plan to distribute this, what states, there's a few different laws on states and how you can get these types of collection kits. So they want you to identify that, as well as, like I said, the supply chain aspects are critical as well for these. There's a high demand on all of these, so making sure you have control of your suppliers as well is very critical for these home testing kits. Hand sanitizer registration. So we've had a lot of non-medical device people reach out and say, they know somebody that can make hand sanitizer. We've seen, I think, a lot of different types of, like liquor companies are making hand sanitizer. Different companies that have experience with chemical formulation, things like that, are able to quickly start manufacturing hand sanitizer, seeing the high demand around the world for hand sanitizer. So we've worked with a few of these companies to actually get them registered. And this is one of the ones that actually falls outside of the medical device scope that is typically covered by Rook and Greenlight. But this actually requires a pharmaceutical registration for hand sanitizer. So with this, you need to have your DUNS number, your CEDAR direct information for your establishment, your label code, product listing. You have to get all of these approved and then go through the process of formally registering your hand sanitizer manufacturing. And then at that point, you can then distribute this hand sanitizer within the US. There's also specific standards from the FDA and ISO standards related to the different types of hand sanitizer and disinfectant. So you want to make sure that you are reviewing this and complying with these standards as you start to go through this little bit different registration process for pharmaceuticals. Big advantage though, compared to med device, there is no fee. So the FDA registration fee for med device is $5,000. There's no fee for pharmaceutical. It just takes a little longer. So respirator registration and testing. So obviously the big demand is for these N95 respirator masks. There's still, as far as I know, talking to nurses and doctors and things like that, there's still a big shortage on these masks. These are designed to be disposable, and we still have talked to people that are using them for weeks and having to put a little surgical mask over their respirator mask, which is not ideal. So we are working with suppliers international as well as manufacturers in the US on making these masks. The big thing to focus on is the NIOSH regulations for respirators. So this NIOSH 42/84/181 will outline what's required. So there are specific quality system regulations as well as NIOSH testing that is required for these masks. Identifying whether yours are sterile or non-sterile, how they're packaged, labeling is all important as well. And then on the quality side and manufacturing side, having your risk analysis, your control plan, your manufacturing sampling plan, having all those identified is important, and this will be reviewed prior to EUA or NIOSH certification. It's similar to, say, like electrical safety testing, where a lot of this paperwork has to be reviewed in addition to the actual pass-fail of the NIOSH regulations for filtering and things like that. So that's kind of the main supply ones. There's obviously other additional things that we could talk about, thermometers, things like that. Those have their own guidances. So if you have specific questions about any other type of device, definitely reach out to us. I know Allison Kamiyama and her team are doing a webinar later today on remote monitoring and digital therapeutics. So definitely listen to that. They'll have a bunch of great information as well on those specific devices. But this is more on if you have a device that's not specifically covered by an EUA, but you think there is a need. And in that situation, we have helped other companies reach out to the FDA, be proactive, put together the information to say, hey, we think we need a specific EUA. This is why, this is how it's going to help. And identify that with them and start the conversation. Same idea, you're labeling, testing, IFU, all of that information will be shared. And we've also seen companies that are kind of in the 510K process, reach out to the FDA and see if they can help speed up that process to get their device on the market related to EUA. So the FDA has granted a few of these already with devices that were not specifically covered, but they have granted EUAs. So definitely something, if you see the need, you've identified that, definitely recommend reaching out to the FDA to get some information on how you can get your FDA EUA authorized. Additionally, the distribution aspect. So, we know there's suppliers and we're trying to get more devices and more PPE here for people in the US that need it. So we've had a ton of people, I can't even count how many reach out to us, and we've helped them identify what standards they need to review, what information is critical for that type of device, whether it be gloves, surgical masks, respirators, gowns, ventilators, things like that. So if you have specific distribution, you're not actually making it, you're just buying it and then making it available to hospitals or other general public, whatever the type of device or PPE, definitely reach out to Rook. We've also created this site, a kind of a partner site with HyperClear that has additional information specifically on COVID-related devices and PPE. So we can help you identify, when FDA registration is needed, if you need ISO or CE, and how that might help your case. Verify what testing is needed. There's been a huge issue with counterfeit, or there's already been a big recall of some of the KN95 masks. So you want to make sure that if you're spending money to import these devices or PPE, that you have everything you needed. Rook is also looking into how we can support audits. We have a team in Taiwan that may be able to support some audits of manufacturers and things like that in Asia. So if you need support with that, also reach out. The big aspect on the distributor, so once you get these things in, you still have to maintain traceability and the complaint handling. So those aspects of your quality system need to be created and included in your internal records, as far as what materials you received, what the lot numbers, all that information was, if there's any incoming testing that you did, and then where you distributed those devices to maintain that traceability in the supply chain. Another thing, not specifically on this slide, I wanted to touch on a little bit was for companies that are working to get EUA in process, but already have an established quality system. We've had some questions on what's the best way to do that. Since the quality system requirements are not as stringent for EUA as they might be for a 510K or a device you're already manufacturing, we've talked to them about how to set up certain aspects of your quality system to address that these documents, these procedures, these records are related specifically for this COVID EUA process, and how you're going to kind of address that with audits in the future. So, if you're using Greenlight, I think there's definitely a lot of tools they have as far as creating new projects, using tag features to say these are all specifically related to the COVID EUA process. Additionally, writing, a memo or outlining in each procedure or record that this is specifically for the COVID EUA. And that's why you might have kind of amended some of your original design processes and not done all of the specific phases or testing that you might do, but you're still in compliance with the EUA. So you don't want to have that issue where you aren't complying with your high-level quality system, but you want to get this on the market as fast as you can. So there are definitely strategies to capture this information in your current quality system, but maintain only to the EUA regulations. And then from here, I think we can open it up to questions. We got roughly, I think, 10 minutes left. So I'll open it up now and see if Jessica has any questions. Additionally, here's our information. So definitely reach out if you have any questions. www.rookqs.com. Additional blog posts and content on COVID-related devices, as well as info@rookqs. There's also a Calendly link on our website, so you can go through that to schedule a meeting with Rook and reach out if you have any questions.
Kyle, one, thank you so much for going through all of this, the presentation. I'm sure more questions will be coming in as we go, but for the first one we have, is UDI required for EUA products, specifically for new products not currently approved via 510K?
I think it depends on the type of product. We have seen some where they do want UDI, such as like diagnostics and things like that, but we have seen some where they're not requiring UDI related barcodes and having to set up that whole process with a GUD ID and all of that. So I would say look at the specific product, look at that guidance to identify whether or not you need a UDI for that specific product.
Another question around, are the details on the FDA EUA approved submissions publicly available? Right now, the question coming in, they said that they're only able to see ventilators on the COVID website with Appendix B, nothing in terms of what the actual submission was.
So it's similar to like a summary letter, but there is the additional information for the IFU and labeling that's on there. So I think it's actually quite a bit of information. So if you look at the FDA's website, they do have additional information for every type of EUA that's been granted, not just ventilators. I know, just like always, the FDA website can be hard to navigate sometimes, but my typical is, just Google search FDA EUA and see what comes up on the FDA site, and then you should be able to find it. If you have specific EUAs that you're looking for, definitely reach out to our email and we can see how we can help.
Question around what the turnaround time is. Any idea or guidance that you're seeing around that right now?
Yeah, we're seeing a few weeks to a month and a half, depending on their product. So I think starting early with communication is key. It's reaching out as soon as you are close and really clarifying what you're trying to do. If it is, like I said, one of the products that doesn't have a specific guidance, then it might take a little longer. But using the tools that are provided with the guidances, the templates, the example IFUs and things like that to get your submission as close as you can. And then, also keeping on the FDA. So emailing them frequently just to make sure they've got a lot of these coming through. I think there's information, 400 or 500 that have already been authorized, but then more, thousands more that are still in the pipeline. So there's a lot. They're doing their best to get these through, but I think doing as much as you can to prep yours, as well as maintaining the communication, are some of the tips to get it through as fast as you can.
And the fees associated with that as well. Anything that you can provide some insight on?
No fees in the event of registration being required, which most of these, like distribution, say it's not. We still have seen certain companies that want it, or hospital groups that want to ensure something's registered before they buy it. That's the typical like $5,300 annual registration fee, but that's not required for an EUA. There's no fee for that.
Okay, so another question that we have is around specifically understanding whether it is a face mask, a medical device, or PPE, and can you market any of this without the EUA approval in place?
Yeah, so that guidance actually for respirators that covers all of the face shields, face masks, surgical masks, whether it is for hospital, home use, whether it has antimicrobial, all of that just got updated last week. So I would say, reach out to Rook or we can send it over to you. But that goes through each different product code and identifies what it is, as well as what information is required as far as testing, if you do need an EUA, if you don't. So that one does a really good job of breaking down what's a respirator, what's a face shield, what's a face mask, what's a surgical mask, breaking down each step in that. So we can help. We've worked with pretty much all of these types, so we can help identify that as well, as that guidance is a really good tool.
Okay, so we know that at some point in time, the EUA will likely expire. Obviously, nothing in terms of when that would happen yet. What happens to any medical devices after that occurs?
Yeah, so any devices that have EUA, after that EUA process ends, then you're no longer allowed to sell whatever that specific diagnostic or test kit or whatever it is. We are working with a lot of the ones that are current Rook clients on kind of planning this to a future FDA 510K submission. Like I said, the Zika EUA is still ongoing. That was started in 2016. So I don't think there's a situation, especially with all the effort the FDA and the U.S. government's putting into funding these things and reviewing them, that they're just going to say, hey, these are all ended at end of 2020. I also think at some point there will be a plan that the FDA puts out to how to transition your EUA to a 510K. I assume that's going to happen. I don't know for sure, but I definitely think there will be some sort of plan to help companies bridge the EUA to a 510K.
Yeah, I think that'd be a fairly reasonable assumption to expect something like that to come out. Got a question. So you talked a little bit about, the difference in terms of like what's required and how do you do these things and what's not required in terms of the EUA, and that there's a little bit less of a burden. We've got one of our questions. They are still a little unclear about what is not required, for an instance, on software as a med device for the EUA versus a 510K submission.
Yeah, so the digital therapeutic guidance does a really good job of outlining what is required. So that's kind of the foundation we've been using for our software related companies. I think Allison will talk about this a little bit more this afternoon, but it's really, they've identified like your traceability matrix, which goes through your requirements, your risks, and your testing, and then your IFU and labeling, and your kind of high level verification validation plan as the key aspects of what they would want to see. So those would also be included in your 510K, but additional information might not be required. That's typically like your more detailed URS, SRS, things like that. I think they're more focused on the traceability matrix, labeling IFU, and the testing that was done.
You mentioned all of the false products and all of the issues there. There was a question around, as a consultant, how do you detect if you've got somebody who is just a profiteer in terms of this pandemic, asking you for help and support, whether or not this is fake product, things like that? How do you deal with that, and what happens if you are turning them away? How do you report this, if at all?
Yeah, so the way we've supported is we've created checklists based on each guidance. So for these like respirators, face masks, things like that, we've created internal checklist where we will work with the original manufacturer to identify if they have all these things. So their ISO cert, their CE mark certification, and then the specific tests that are required for that specific device, verify through images of labeling that it is the same device. And then from there, we would typically give yes or no to that purchaser on whether or not we think this is a legitimate device. We have obviously rejected a few that we say, this is not what they are claiming it is. So we don't recommend you use your money to do this, right? So that's kind of our role, is through reviewing the guidances, reviewing checklists, and requesting all of these actual test records, making sure all the names match, those types of things on these records. We're also, like I said, trying to set up potential remote or on-site audits if needed for some of these things as well.
Okay, we've got time for one last question. So we talked a little bit about the length of time for those EUAs. Are you seeing any trends in terms of the length of time for clearance for the 510K or approvals for the PMA? Any changes in that?
So the FDA did say that there was a 60-day extension on all of those. That came out, I think, April, March, that they are kind of just adding 60 days to your normal 90-day timeline. Like I said, if you think your product that is currently under a 510K review or PMA review has applications for COVID pandemic or EUA, I would definitely reach out and make the case and see if there's anything you can do to kind of accelerate that process.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kyle. We still have a couple of questions that we weren't able to get to today. I know Kyle will be following up with you guys. If you guys have any questions whatsoever, if you want to talk more with Kyle, you can see his information up here. So you guys are more than welcome to continue this conversation. We asked during here, are you guys currently considering or pursuing EUA? It looks like roughly half of you are either going through, a little over half are yes, currently pursuing or considering, or that you might be. So definitely reach out to Kyle at Rook Qualtiy Systems. You can see the info at rookqs.com, getting more information there. So as a reminder, you can still continue to attend the other sessions later today. The next one starts in a little less than 10 minutes. You can register on the virtual-summit.greenlight.guru. And thank you guys for attending today's session.
Thank you.